Hi, my name is Alicia Herring, and I am a kindergarten teacher at Hand in Hand in Thomas County. I would like to take a moment to go over some data that I have collected from GKids for the last 3 years in language arts and math, and show you how Hand in Hand compares to the state, and then how our students at Hand in Hand are performing on the GKids standards. The Georgia Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills, or GKids, is a year-long performance-based assessment aligned to the state content standards. The goal of the program is to provide teachers with information about the level of instructional support needed by individual students entering kindergarten and first grade. It allows teachers to assess student performance during instruction, record the performance in an online database, and generate reports for the instructional planning, report cards, or parent conferences. The data shared with you today will be used to identify strong and weak areas of student achievement in GKids language arts and math assessments. This data can be used to develop an action plan with long-term and short-term goals, helping staff members focus on solutions for improvement of learner-centered problems. What do you think we will see with the data? Do you think our students are stronger in language arts or math? Let's go visual and find out. If you look at Hand in Hand compared to the state in overall language arts, you can see that the state outperformed Hand in Hand in 2012. In 2013, Hand in Hand makes a jump on the state from 76 for the 76.7 with the state meeting or exceeding, and 81.5% of Hand in Hand students meeting or exceeding in language arts. In 2014, you see the same pattern, 77.2% of the state students were performing at meets or exceeds, and 81.8% of Hand in Hand students were meeting or exceeding. If we look at math overall, of the students at or above proficiency, in 2012, the state outperformed Hand in Hand students by a slight amount. In 2013, again, the state average was better than Hand in Hand, from the 82.6 for the state and 81.7 for Hand in Hand. And then in 2014, you see that we have just a slight increase of students meeting or exceeding against the state. The state had 83.5 and Hand in Hand had 84% meeting or exceeding. Then if we break it down further and we look at language arts just by the standards and compare ourselves to the state, this would just be for 2014. In reading, we outperform the state. In writing, we have more students meeting or exceeding. In speaking and listening, we have a slight amount meeting or exceeding more than the state. And then in language, again, we are outperforming the state. So a strength would be that Hand in Hand is above the state in every standard as far as performance. And then you can see our weakest area for Hand in Hand and the state would be writing. If we do the same thing with math, and we look at just 2014 and we break math down into the standards, for counting and cardinality, you can see that the state outperformed Hand in Hand a little bit. And then for the operations and algebraic thinking, the state also had a slight increase over Hand in Hand. Then when we get to numbers and operations, Hand in Hand is outperforming the state as a whole. In measurement and data, we're outperforming the state as a whole. And then in geometry, we are outperforming the state as a whole. And if you look across the board, we're actually, compared to the state, pretty close in all areas. So that would be a strength. And then our weakest area would be our operations and algebraic thinking. If we break language arts down further into the same standards that you just saw with us compared to the state, and we just look at the Hand in Hand students over the last 3 years to see if we are having increases or decreases, you can see that in reading we went from 79.7 meeting or exceeding to 80.4 in 2013 and then 81.6 in 2014. In 2012 for writing, we had 63.8% of the students meeting or exceeding, and then we jumped to 77.7%, and then a slight increase in 2014 to 78%. For speaking and listening, we started with 88.4% meeting or exceeding, and then we decreased to 85.2%, and then we decreased again in 2014 to 83.8%. And then with language, we did the same kind of pattern. We had 84.5 meeting or exceeding in 2013, and then 83.4 in 2014. But if you remember from the beginning, in 2011, 2012, we were doing GPS standards, so some of the data, the changes in data, might be a reflection of our standards changing. Now if we look at math and do the same thing, those are the same standards that you saw earlier, and now we're just looking at it with our hand-in-hand students for over the last 3 years. In 2011 and 2012, you can see that again we were on the GPS standards, and so our math standards for Common Core are not even the same as they were for GPS. So we don't have data for the 2011-2012 year. But if you start looking at 2013, we had an increase in counting and cardinality from 81 to 85. Then we increased our operations and algebraic thinking from 71.2 to 76.2. when this is actually our weakest area, but you can see that we did experience a gain from 13 to 14. And then in numbers and operations in base 10, we had a real big jump from 60.5 to 77.4, and then we had a slight decrease in measurement and data from 91 to 90.2, and then in geometry we had a slight decrease from 89 to 87. So a strength would be our increase in counting and cardinality and the operations and algebraic thinking and the numbers and operations in base 10, even though those were some of our weakest areas overall compared to the state. If we take our standards and break it down into elements to find strength and weaknesses, with our reading standard broken down, we have emergent readers and high frequency words and producing initial, medial, and final sounds. And you can see overall that we have made steady gains from 2012 to 2014, with our weakest area being the sight words at 65.7%. If we do the same thing with math and break a standard from math down into our elements, we have an element of identifying shapes representing addition and subtraction, whether a group is greater than, less than, or equal to, representing a number with for objects, and then counting to 100 by tens and ones. And again, some of this data is not comparable because of the standards changing. But you can see we increased in the counting from 68 to 74. We increased in representing a number of objects from the 71 to the 80. Then in whether a group is greater than, equal, or less than, we experienced a gain in 2013, but then dropped back down in 2014. And then with addition and subtraction, we had just a slight gain, and then identifying shapes, kind of the same pattern as the grouping, where we had 81 and then 94 and then back down to 89. Even though we had an increase in counting to 100 by tens and ones, it is still, overall, looking at the elements, our weakest element. Now, if we take enrollment status at hand-in-hand into consideration, breaking the data down even further, our student enrollment has increased. In 2012, we had 326 students. In 2013, we had 367. And in 2014, we had 406 with enrollment. So our population is increasing. So we can see if that has an effect on our data. If we break it down into demographics, you can see that the white population is actually decreasing from 222 then to well, it increased a little, 230, but then it dropped in 2014 to 214. And then the African American population is making a steady increase, 97, 125, and 147. Our Latinos went from 7, 12 to 15, so we still don't have a big population with them, but it is increasing a little. And then our students with disabilities was 37, 42, and then 48. And I say the students with disabilities because in our GKIDS data, that's the subgroups it compares. So if we take language arts and we find our weakest area, which in the previous data was sight words, and we look at our total population performing at or above proficiency, you can see that we were making gains from 49.6 to 50.7 and then 65.7 as a whole. But if we break it down by the groups, by the subgroups that GKIDS breaks their information down into, you can see that the white students did not make, or they stayed the same from 2012 to 2013, and then made an increase in 2014. And the African Americans have been making a steady gain in sight words, and the students with disabilities have been decreasing in proficiency from 2012 to 2014. If we do the same thing with math and look at our weakest area overall for the element in math, which was counting as a total population, it looks like we're increasing. But if we break it down into the subgroups from GKIDS, then we can see that the white students actually the white students gain from 72.3 to 77.8. The African American students made a gain in meeting or exceeding, and again the students with disabilities had a decrease in proficiency for counting. So overall, our strengths in language arts, the gains were made by the white subgroup in reading CVC words. Gains were made by every subgroup in reading sight words with the exception of the students with disabilities. And some weaknesses, the sight words and the reading emergent reader text, which was another element, continue to be weak areas of performance for hand-in-hand students when compared to our other language arts standards. Some strengths for math is gains were made by every subgroup in meets or exceeds, excluding the students with disabilities on representing the objects with a written numeral. The black population was the only subgroup that did not make gains in meets on this standard. And then all subgroups made gains in exceeding on counting to 100, even though that's still a weak area overall. Some weaknesses, the all subgroup decreased on determining whether a group is greater than, less than, or equal to. The black subgroup made a slight increase in that area. Every subgroup decreased on identifying flat and solid shapes. And then counting and adding and subtraction continues to be the weakest areas overall for hand-in-hand students when compared to the other standards in math. So what can we do? We can build a foundation for looking at our data and learning the process I just overviewed for using it to establish a purpose for student instruction. We can use our data to identify student strengths and weaknesses in all content areas. We can break the data down to identify student learning problems. We can verify the cause of the problems and don't just assume we know why increases or decreases are happening in our data. And then we can generate solutions to improve our data results. We can implement those solutions and monitor those results. And finally, we can see student achievement increasing at Hand-in-Hand Primary School. Thank you.